Oh, but how could Chucky have possibly survived that and come back for a sequel? Great question. I would love to tell you. Let's do it. Child's Play 2 takes place 2 years after the events of Child's Play 1 and opens up at the location of the Good Guy Dolls manufacturer. So there's these executives talking about how the events that happened from the last movie with Andy gave Good Guys bad publicity because the kid said that the doll did it. Of course, nobody believes him. And Andy's mom was actually put in a psychiatric facility because she backed her son's claims. So to convince the stockholders that there was nothing wrong with the doll, they acquire Chucky's remains somehow. They reassemble him, so we see this Chucky doll that is burnt to a crisp, and they completely put him back together and give him new parts and make him brand new. As they're doing this, there is this freak power surge that kills one of the employees and reanimates Chucky. The CEO of the company tells his assistant, okay, we need to bury this, get rid of the doll. Then we cut to Andy, who again, we learn that his mother has been institutionalized, so he is now in foster care. The woman who runs the orphanage calls in this couple, Phil and Joanne, because apparently they've had a history of taking in troubled kids. They agree to take in Andy, or more so Joanne does. Phil is not really into this whole idea. So they take Andy home and introduce him to Kyle, who's another foster kid they have in their care, and she's like the rebellious teenager. Then we cut to Chucky, who we see is still very much alive. And remember from the last movie, the only way that Chucky would be able to become human again is if he puts his soul into the person that he first revealed himself to, which is Andy. The CEO's assistant, who the CEO told him get rid of the doll, he's driving in his car with Chucky in the back seat when Chucky attacks him. He kills him, but not before he's able to get information as to where Andy is. So Chucky finds where Andy is staying and goes to the house where he impersonates another good guy doll named Tommy. Andy finds Chucky and is absolutely fucking terrified, and the parents, specifically Phil, who's just a total dick, is like, get the fuck over it. So Andy is still skeptical, but he just moves on, because at this point Chucky has not spoken to him, so for all Andy knows, this could just be a regular good guy doll. So Andy and Kyle start to bond a little bit, and one day they're accused by the parents of breaking this heirloom that belonged to Joanne, and neither of them admit to it. And that's because we saw that Chucky was the one that purposely broke this thing in the middle of the night. That night, Andy wakes up strapped to his bed with Chucky over him trying to do this voodoo ritual to put his soul into him again. But he's not able to complete this because Kyle comes in and unties him and Chucky goes into his doll mode so she doesn't think he's alive. She fully just thinks that Andy somehow managed to tie himself up. Phil and Joanne come in and blame Kyle for tying Andy up. And when Andy persists that it was Chucky, Phil gets pissed off, grabs the doll, and throws Chucky into the basement. Chucky notices that his nose starts to bleed, which if you remember from the first movie means that he is about to become trapped in this doll body forever. So he knows that he has to move things along. The next day, Chucky decides to follow Andy to school where he has this just terrible, awful, bitchy teacher that is just rude to him right off the bat for no fucking reason. While she's not looking, Chucky defaces Andy's homework and makes this like obscene drawing of her, which causes Andy to get detention. After school, it's just Andy and his teacher, Mrs. Kettlewell, who of course doesn't believe him when he says that Chucky's alive. Until that is, Chucky emerges and attacks her and kills her by beating her with a yardstick. Andy manages to escape and he goes home where he tells Phil and Joanne about what happened. Of course, they still don't believe him and Phil tells Joanne, like, I think we need to return him to the orphanage. We can't handle this. That night, Andy's had enough and he takes this like meat cutter power saw thing from the kitchen and goes into the basement because he knows that's where Chucky went back to. Chucky manages to overpower Andy and a struggle ensues, which Phil hears. Phil goes downstairs where Chucky proceeds to trip him. He falls and is hanging upside down by his feet and Chucky goes up to him and says, "How's it hanging, Phil?" So he now knows that Chucky's alive before Chucky kills him. Joanne is absolutely devastated. Obviously, she calls the cops and she also has Andy sent back to the foster care home. Kyle, meanwhile, is pretty suspicious of all this and she's starting to believe Andy. Her suspicions are confirmed when she finds Tommy buried in the yard, because when Chucky got there, he buried Tommy in the yard to make it seem like he was Tommy. Kyle goes to warn Joanne, but finds that Chucky has already killed her and she's dead in her bedroom. Chucky then attacks Kyle and forces her to drive him to the foster care center that Andy just went back to. When they get there, Chucky stabs Grace, the woman that runs the foster center, to death. He kidnaps Andy and forces him to go to the Good Guy Dolls factory. Andy sees where they're going and follows behind. However, by the time she gets there, Chucky has knocked Andy unconscious and has completely performed the voodoo ritual. But it's too late. He spent too much time in his Chucky body, so the spell fails and he's just trapped in this body forever. Chucky is now completely enraged, and Kyle comes in, grabs Andy, and a chase ensues throughout the factory. Chucky kills one of the technicians in the factory by putting him on the belt and he gets stabbed with like the plastic eyes. Kyle and Andy manage to use the assembly line equipment to mutilate Chucky, and one of his hands rips off, which he then proceeds to put a blade into, and now he has a knife hand. Great. He manages to knock Kyle out, and she is on the assembly belt being taken to this machine that will surely kill her. Andy manages to save her in the nick of time. Andy then is able to release this emergency valve, which causes this hot molten wax to fall on Chucky and kill him. Or at least it seems like it does. Andy and Kyle approach the now melted Chucky thinking that he's dead, but of course, jump scare, he comes back to life. Kyle grabs this pressure hose nearby and shoves it into Chucky's mouth, which causes his head to inflate and explode. He has finally been killed for the second time. Andy and Kyle leave the factory having won, and they're like, let's go home. And they're like, wait, we don't have a home. And the movie ends. I'm sorry, it's depressing.